So today I want to go over one of the most unique and interesting builds in the entirety of Diablo 4, which is a boulder build for the Druid. And I've been wanting to make a build like this since Season 2 started, but I got incredibly unlucky until now because one of the main things you need for this build to work is the Dolmen Stone unique amulet. Now the special of this is casting Boulder while Hurricane is active will cause your boulders to rotate around you. So we cast Hurricane, that's an AoE that swirls around you, and now anytime we cast Boulder when a Hurricane is active, boulders now get trapped in that and constantly spin around you in a circle. And you can basically have an infinite amount of boulders in that Hurricane as long as you can continue to cast Boulder because it does have a decently high spirit cost. Now you're also going to need a Tempest Roar for this version of the build to work, but I am working on a bunch of other versions of a Boulder build, and I think there actually are a ton of other really good versions as well. And I almost consider this version of a Boulder Druid to be the kind of base. So starting off, we have our skill tree starting with our generator, which we're going to be using Wind Shear primarily because of one of the upgrades and because it's a ranged generator. You can use Storm Strike, but because of how the boulders in the Hurricane work, you want to be not in melee range. You want to be a little bit outside of that. Upgrade 1 has a chance to make enemies vulnerable. Upgrade 2, which is pretty important, gives you increased movement speed for every enemy hit up to 20%. This build doesn't have as much movement speed as most other builds because our unique amulet doesn't have movement speed on it, so this helps with that as well. Then you're not going to be taking any skills here, so you're probably going to need to put some points into some passives. So you can put like 3 points into Predatory Instinct, or you can go up and put 3 points into Wild Impulses. Then going down, we're going to take Blood Howl. This is just a heal. Upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown on kills. Upgrade 2 gives us increased attack speed. The increased attack speed is important, but this is also important to shapeshift us into wolf form, which is going to come into play with some other of our abilities and effects. Then we're going all the way down and we're putting 1 point in the Hurricane. This is primarily to apply other effects and obviously to trap all of our boulders. Upgrade 1 makes Hurricane slow. Upgrade 2 makes enemies deal less damage. Then we're going to be putting 5 points into Boulder, which is going to be our main ability. Upgrade 1 will add a little bit of additional CC. Upgrade 2 gives you 20% increased crit chance with Boulder when you have Fortify, which is massive, will always have Fortify. Then 1 into Trample. Upgrade 1 makes it deal more damage when there's less enemies. One of the main reasons we're taking this is casting Trample grants you 40 Spirit. Then for our ultimate, we're taking Petrify, which stuns all enemies, makes you deal more crit damage to them. If it's against a boss, you just deal a lot more critical strike damage to them. Then for our capstone, we have Nature's Fury. When you cast an Earth skill, you have a 30% chance to trigger a free Storm skill and vice versa. And we're going to be using this because we're also going to be using the legendary aspect that whenever this effect procs, it lowers the cooldown of the opposite abilities. And this is going to be one of the main ways of how we have Hurricane up 100% of the time, because Hurricane being up 100% of the time, or almost 100% of the time, is very important for the build to actually work. And then we have our passives, 1 into Heart of the Wild for 3 into Wild Impulses. Core skills deal more damage, but cost more spirit. And because of one of our legendary aspects, Boulder is going to be a core skill. 3 into Predatory Instinct for increased critical strike chance, and then 3 into increased movement speed while on Werewolf, and for 3 seconds after. And since we're Blood Howling, we'll have that up quite a bit. 3 into Ancestral Fortitude for increased resistances. 3 into Vigilance for a damage reduction after using a defensive. Then we're going down 3 into Crushing Earth. Earth skills deal more damage to CC'd enemies. 1 into Safeguard, which is the main way we're going to have Fortify. Critical strikes with Earth skills fortify you for 2% of your base life, and we're going to have dozens of boulders rotating around us. Every single time one of those crits, it's going to fortify us. Then 3 into Stone Guard. When you have Fortify over 50% of your max life, you deal more damage. And then 1 into Neurotoxin and 1 into Toxic Claws. Critical strikes with Werewolf skills deal 8% of their base damage as poison damage. Now this is one of the main reasons we're using Tempest Roar, because now our Storm skills are also Werewolf skills. So now Hurricane is a Werewolf skill, meaning anytime Hurricane crits, it applies a poison, which we have very high crit, so it'll poison everything. This will give us a ton of additional scaling, including from Envenom, where we get bonus critical strike damage. Then we're going down 3 into Defiance, increase nature damage against elites. 3 into Natural Disaster. Your Earth skills deal more damage to vulnerable enemies. Storm skills deal increased damage to CC'd enemies. Then Resonance. Nature skills deal more damage. Triple this bonus if an Earth skill is the next cast after a Storm skill, and vice versa. and we'll be able to keep this applied quite a lot of the time. And then next up we have our Spirit Boons. Wariness, take reduced damage from elites. Then we're using Swooping Attacks for increased attack speed, both to be able to cast boulders faster and to be able to use Wind Shear more, especially against bosses. Because when you're facing anything but bosses, you basically have infinite spirit, but against bosses you actually need Wind Shear to generate spirit. Then Slight Talents for increased critical strike chance. Down on the next row, you really don't have much that's actually very good. Calamity isn't that great for Petrify. Bolster we really don't need, so I'm going Energize, just a lucky hit that can restore some spirit. I think this is generally gonna be better than everything else in the row. Then we have Obsidian Slam. Every 20th kill will cause your next Earth skill to overpower, so this just means the next boulder will overpower, and again, there's nothing else in this row that is really better than Obsidian Slam. And then next up we have our Vampiric Powers, starting with Undying. Casting a skill heals you for 3% of your life, double below 50% life, massive amounts of healing. Metamorphosis, so our Evade now turns us into bats, makes us unstoppable is a main reason we're using this. Infinite Unstoppable. Then we have Ravenous, another lucky hit, up to a 20% chance to increase your attack speed by 40% of your movement speed. Currently at 46%, this will also increase. This is a big help to cast boulders quicker, and especially on bosses to just Wind Shear much more. Then we have Prey on the Weak, deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and enemies afflicted by Vampiric Curse are vulnerable, which mixes with a Cursed Touch. Another lucky hit that inflicts Vampiric Curse, and this can spread. Then the souls stored from Vampiric's Curse also deal massively increased damage, so these will work very well together. So once we apply this, the enemy is always vulnerable. And next up we have our Paragon Boards, and we're primarily going to be going over the board selection and the glyph selection. There'll be build planners in the description, so you can follow point by point if you want to do that as well. Now the starter board, we have Tectonic, increased critical strike damage with Earth skills, and then 15% increase the lucky hit chance. Now lucky hit chance is much less important in this build, but we do have a few things, so this does help out. Then we're going up, we're taking the Heightened Malice board. While 3 or more enemies are poisoned near you, deal massively increased damage, one of the best legendary nodes in the game. The glyph we're taking is Earth and Sky, which buffs all magic nodes within range, so we get more damage to poison enemies, damage reduction from poison enemies, but what's really important is we can get massively increased dexterity or intelligence within range, so we can get the secondary effect of most rare nodes throughout our boards. Then we're going over to the left, we're taking Inner Beast. After shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 10% up to 30%. Now this is really good for massively reducing our spirit costs, especially on bosses, and both our Bloodhowl and Trample will shapeshift us. Bloodhowl into Werewolf, Trample into Werebear, so we'll be able to keep this stacked a lot of the time. Then the glyph we're taking is Undaunted, increased damage while fortified, damage reduction while fortified. Then we're going down, we're taking the Earthen Devastation board. Your Earth skills deal increased critical strike damage, and this is increased from your damage versus crowd controlled. My bonus is currently 19%. That's still multiplicative, so it's still big, but I can optimize this more with getting some more damage versus crowd controlled on, say, my weapon. And the glyph we're taking is Outmatch, and this buffs all rare nodes within range, and this will give us massively increased critical strike with Earth skills, but what's really important is this will give us increased resistance to all elements. One of the big ways where we're getting all of our elements capped out. Then we're going back up, we're taking the Ancestral Guidance board. After you spend 75 spirit, deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. This will be procced a lot of the time. And then we're going back down, we're going all the way over, we're taking the Constricting Tendrils board, and the glyph we're taking is Spirit. Increased critical strike damage, and critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you by 2% up to 12%, so some massively increased damage. And then next up we have our gems, our uniques, and our legendary aspects. In your weapons you want critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies, in your gear you want max life, and in your jewelry you want to put whatever in these that'll make you cap out on all of your resistances. As you can see, I have resistance to all elements, so all of my resistances are capped. If you don't need more gems to cap your resistances, just put skull gems in your jewelry for more armor. Then for our uniques, as we went over Dolmen Stone, you need this for the build to work, and I got incredibly unlucky, but I finally have it. Then we're using Tempest Roar, which is a lucky hit. Storm skills have up to a 25% chance to grant 4 spirit, and your base storm skills are now also werewolf skills. Now you can generate some spirit from this, but this is primarily so our Hurricane is a werewolf skill, so our Hurricane can poison enemies. And then for our legendary aspects, and one of the most important is Boulder is now a core skill and costs 50 spirit to cast and does more damage. So now Boulder will scale off of our core skills. It has a 50 base spirit cost, so we can just cast it more and make it do a lot more damage. And the other very important aspect is when Nature's Fury procs, your non-ultimate cooldowns of the opposite type are reduced. So this is for our capstone. So whenever we use an Earth skill and a Storm skill is freely procced, it'll reduce our Storm skill cooldowns and vice versa. Then the main way you're going to be generating spirit on this build is restore 1 to 4 of your primary resource when you crowd control an enemy. And with this one legendary aspect, you basically have infinite fury when not facing a boss, because all enemies that aren't bosses can be CC'd, and Boulder still CCs enemies with every single boulder. So you basically stunlock any non-boss enemies because you'll have dozens of boulders circling around you. Every single one that hits an enemy will knock them back repeatedly. Every time they do that, that'll give you 4 of your primary resource. So this is how you have infinite spirit when not facing bosses. This is also a very important part of the build. Then for our other offensive aspects, casting a storm skill grants your earth skills increased critical strike damage, and casting earth skills increase your critical strike chance of your storm skills. And the critical strike chance of your storm skills, which usually isn't super important for these types of builds, is because Hurricane is the main way we apply poison. This build actually plays very similar to trample builds I've gone over previously, just it's more focused on having these boulders. Then finally, your core skills deal up to 40% increased damage based on your fortify. I have a base roll of this, but this will be a massive damage increase when I get a better roll. Then for our defensives, you want basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for up to 6 seconds. We're going to be using wind shear a lot, especially on bosses, but you do want to throw in wind shears for the increased movement speed and for the damage reduction. Then on our legs, we have disobedience for percent armor stacking, so we can get basically capped on armor when this is fully stacked. And then we have our gear stats. Now, since it took me so long to get Dolmen Stone and I was so unlucky with it, I really don't have the best stats for this build, so there's a lot of optimization I can do. For your chest, you basically want all damage reductions. Damage reduction from close, from distant, from poison, from fortified, any damage reduction. On your legs, you want all damage reduction, but on your legs is also where you get a +2 boulder. So you can get +3 to boulder on your legs as well, which I don't have yet. That'll actually be a pretty big damage increase. So on your legs, you just want all damage reduction and a boulder roll. And I think one of the best damage reductions is damage reduction while injured, especially when you're doing higher tier content, but then damage reduction from close, from fortified, from poisoned. On your gloves, you want attack speed, critical strike chance, storm skill cooldown reduction is decent, but I do think I want to change that roll because I think you get enough resets of Hurricane where this doesn't matter. So that's something I can change up. Then a willpower roll is going to be good as well. But I do think another damage roll like critical strike damage over the storm skill cooldown reduction is actually going to be better. Then on your boots, movement speed, damage reduction while injured, dodge chance against distant enemies, and then a spirit cost reduction or a resource generation is going to be really good. And I did also forget to go over the legendary aspect on these boots, which is while unstoppable in 4 seconds after you gain increased movement speed and can freely move through enemies. This is really good because we'll have infinite unstoppable with metamorphosis. Then on your weapon, willpower, critical shock damage with earth skills, vulnerable damage, core skill damage, but you do want to change one of these damage rolls to damage versus crowd controlled, which is going to be really good for that glyph. Then on your rings, resource generation, max life, physical damage, critical strike chance. I think these are going to be the best rolls, but a lot of these damage rolls can be changed out for stuff like physical damage could be changed out for most other damage rolls and you'll be fine. And same things for both rings. And then finally on your offhand, critical strike chance, spear cost reduction, resource generation, those are all going to be really good. You can also get things like cooldown reduction, and some of the best rolls that I don't have on this would be damage reduction from poisoned and from fortified. If you're doing much higher tier content like Nightmare 100s, getting that damage reduction would actually serve you better than having, say, like a resource generation. But that's the entirety of this build, and I am very excited to continue doing different versions of Boulder Druid builds. Like I mentioned, I was super unlucky. I did probably 100 or hundreds of runs and didn't get the Dolmen Stone. Finally got it, so there's a bunch of other builds I want to do for Boulder Druids because I think there's going to be a bunch of different versions I'm able to make that change up the build in interesting ways. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.